What's up, guys? We got another game as black against Mikhail 1963, 1900. Let's look at the game. So he opens with e4, and as usual, we are practicing our caro-kann. Now, I almost never face this. I don't know what this is. d3. I'm not sure the ideas behind it. Never seen a video about it. So I just continue with d5. He develops his knight. And now, normally, I assume you just take the pawn, and when he recaptures with his pawn, you could take the queen and play that. Um, maybe, I guess that's just the normal thing, but I didn't want to play a game like that. I think it's probably good for black, but um, I decided to play an actual game of chess with the queens on the board. And I also wanted to do something weird since he did something weird. I didn't want to bring my bishop out, play e6 with a normal caro-kann structure, which is perfectly fine. I wanted to try, since he didn't put a pawn on d4 and the diagonal's open, I want to just fin kettle my bishop and see what happens. So I play g6. Now this is not theory, this is all on the spot. For me, anyway. He takes the pawn, I recapture with the pawn. It's not isolated and I want two pawns in the center if I can help it, and this square for the knight. So I like my position. He spends a whole tempo doing this, which I'm not saying it's a bad move, but why would you start off with d3? Anyway, um, a normal move would be bishop g7, being following up on g6. Also, knight c6 makes a lot of sense. I don't know why I played bishop g4. There's nothing wrong with it, but that should be like the third move after developing this bishop and this knight. But for some reason, I chose to develop it immediately. And if he kicks it, I'm just going to take it anyway. This knight controls dark squares, and I'm going to want dark squares control myself, whereas light squares I'm leaving to my pawns. So he unpins the knight. I develop a piece and also cover this diagonal from checks. It also hits the pawn one time. He plays c3, solidifying his center so that minor pieces can never really win this pawn. So I just continue with bishop g7 so I can develop and castle. He castles immediately. I develop my knight and prepare castling. He develops a minor piece. Um, he develops the bishop first so that the knight doesn't block it in. And now I need to finish my development, so I castle. He develops his last minor piece. And because he wasted that tempo with the pawn, you'll see that our back rank, we both have to move our queens to finish developing, but it's my turn, so I finish first, even though he's white. Okay, so there's not anything specific that I see to do for black or that I know to do. I guess you can bring a rook to one of the open, or like maybe the c file, semi-open, the e file, maybe to protect this pawn, open up an extra square. I don't really know. I developed my queen just to connect the rooks. I know it doesn't do much. I know this pawn, it's not really a threat, but I know he'll likely respond to it in some way, and then I can decide what I want to do from there. It doesn't really have any true objective other than to put like phantom pressure on the pawn and maybe cause him to make an inaccuracy. It's not a bad move for me either, and I know it's not going to worsen my position. Mm. So he defends the pawn by moving the knight here. I'm not sure that's a good square for the knight, but I don't really know. I guess it didn't have any other squares anyway, so whatever. doesn't threaten anything except to come into this square, which maybe we don't want in the future. The drawback of this move is that it relinquishes control of the e4 square. So I noticed that and I hop my knight in to his position. It also controls this square, which is funny. Okay, so he retreats this knight here, hitting both of my minor pieces. So I just trade the bishops, which I wanted to trade anyway. And now I could trade the knights as well and just develop normally, bring my rooks into the game. Instead, I did a fancy move, knight d6. You could also go back to its home square, defending the pawn and just a good square for the knight. I went to this square, which is a bit weird, but I do like knights here and these two squares. I know that he could take and double my pawns, leaving me with double isolated pawns, but because they cover this square and this square, I thought that, and he gives up his bishop, his dark square bishop, I thought that it would be worth it for me. So he doesn't take, and he moves his rook, which protects this pawn, maybe to free up his knight for knight c5, I'm guessing. I noticed that my queen did its job by causing this knight to go here in the first place, now causing the rook to spend a tempo. And it's felt like, as black, after solidifying my center, I want to push these pawns, like for a minority type attack maybe. So I need my queen out of the way. I thought that the best move would actually be to bring it back home, um, which it apparently is one of the best moves. So he develops his rook, putting a second attacker here. It's not under attack because of the knight though. Like, it's not an actual threat yet. And so now I still need to find a way to make my position better. I could move my rooks again to these two squares, slight improvement. So I do move this rook. I'm over defending this. Maybe I want to move my knight one day or my queen. He goes queen f3, hitting this pawn, which is now under attack. Although it does take away the square from the knight, so that's a little weird. I just go e6, solidifying my center and making sure he's not going to win any of my pawns at any point. It does weaken the dark squares a little, but that's okay. I have a fianchetto bishop, queens, knights. I have plenty of stuff. So he does hop his knight into here, which does create the threat of bishop takes knight, queen takes bishop, knight takes pawn. So I obviously don't want that to happen. So I immediately go b6, which was my plan to kick the knight once it got in the square, because I didn't want it to be in the square anyway. So he moves the knight, he copies me because he can't come up with his own ideas. And then now I'm trying to think how to improve my position. There's one piece left that I didn't put into the game. I don't really have any forward jump moves that make a lot of sense, so I just bring the last piece into the game and also pressure the c file. So this looks pretty good. He jumps his knight into the center, which also looks pretty good because I can't punish him for it. It's a good move. But I ignore it because he's not creating, that doesn't create any threats. And white would have to, like white's pawn break on the king side would have to be with the f or h pawns. And that just looks slow because I'm going for my minority attack with the b pawn, and I get it started right away with b5. He takes my knight. I have to take back. And now he shifts his queen over, creating the threat of bishop takes knight, queen takes bishop, queen takes pawn, winning a pawn again. So how can I counter this? Well, by moving forward into his position, I go knight to c4, removing the attack on the knight. What? attack on the knight and plugging the hole and getting ready to create queenside weaknesses, which is the whole point of a minority attack. So he takes. You could take with the rook, but that just doesn't look as weakening, because if I take with the b pawn, it comes with tempo, number one, and two, I'll be able to create a further weakness with one of these pawns. So I take, he has to move his queen, but now I get to weaken these pawns by using the b and a files. So I immediately go queen a5, creating a threat in the position and creating room for my rook to swing over. He defends the threat in this manner, and I don't want to leave his pawns here with a 2-on-1, and also it would be hard for me to ever do anything with this weakness, so of course I take en passant. That way, no matter how he recaptures, he's still stuck with weaknesses that I can attack. He recaptures with the rook instead of the pawn, defending, but now he has two weaknesses instead of one, and that should be good for me. So how to improve black's position? Well, the obvious way is to move your rook over and hit this 3 times. That's what I do. So instead of defending this pawn with rook c1, he comes up with a cool idea of rook b1. And the point is, if I take his pawn, he takes my rook. And then if I take his rook, he takes my queen. And if I take his queen, he goes check. My only legal move is to block with the bishop. And then he can go bishop h6, hitting the pinned bishop. I can't deliver checkmate because the bishop still covers that square. And so after like f5, it's still checkmate. So that was a cool idea. Back rank problems with this idea. So I knew I couldn't take the pawn just yet, so I needed to solve the back rank issue. So I played h5 so that on his check I can go to h7, and there's no pin and there's no bishop h6. And now this becomes a threat again. I am threatening to take this pawn, but he can't really do much about it because he'll be in passivity the whole game. But if he doesn't, he loses it. So it's not really fun for white here. Black is always preferable. So he makes Luft for his king because he had back rank problems in certain lines. Um, and it also creates a escape square for his bishop. Not that he needs it. And now that the pawn, I feel like maybe he should have defended this pawn instead of moving this. Because now I just take it because it is hanging. And after the trades, I am up a pawn, but rook endgames up a pawn are usually draw if he just gets behind it. He goes check. Again, I'm not going to go here and walking to this. So I move my king. Now he goes up and he's hitting two different pawns. So how can I beat a 1900 in this position? Well, I'm going to lose one of these pawns because I can't defend them both at the same time. This pawn is currently hanging, and it does defend this pawn. So we take another pawn, since we're going to lose a pawn anyway. Now he takes, of course we go to the tempo square, hitting the rook. He's hitting this pawn. The most solid approach is probably rook c6, defending the pawn. And even though it's temporarily a passive thing, you're going to just kick the rook next move anyway. And he can't take anything because everything's defended. And because your entire position is defended, you just get to slowly win easily. The less solid move, the one I went for, is rook c2, creating even bigger threats than him winning a pawn. And so I felt like this gives white way more chances to go wrong um, than playing rook c6, the slow move. So I went for this because, again, I'm attacking two pawns. One of them comes with check, He does have a good move here. Luckily, he didn't find it. His good move is bishop e3, nullifying this threat and trading bishops. So, like bishop e3, I take his bishop, he takes my pawn. If I take his pawn, he takes my pawn, and then with just that rook and pawn endgame up this pawn, he can get behind it and probably hold a draw. But he didn't do that. He took the pawn instead, which is what I was hoping for. I mean, I set him up for this. Now, if I take with the bishop, he's probably fine because he can move his king. I mean, it's still bad, but it was pawn for pawn. I feel like take. I feel like inserting king f7 hits the rook and also defends his pawn. So like if I just take the pawn and move, I guess I can go king f7 after. But I wanted to take with the rook, not the bishop. And the taking with the rook does not come with check. So I just inserted this move first. It's a tempo move which hits the rook and defends his pawn and keeps all my threats alive. He goes to attack this pawn. And now that I'm ready, I capture with my rook. And this creates potential discoveries. It also hits his bishop. If his bishop moves, it also creates rook f6, winning the rook. And so I thought this was pretty clever. He moves his king out of the discoveries, which makes a lot of sense, but then you lose the bishop. But you don't have a choice in that position. Now he wins the central pawn. So it's 3 on 3. I'm up a bishop, but a lot of people could mess this up as black. I just drop my bishop back into this pawn bishop structure because I know it's safe. They protect each other. I don't have to worry about it, loose pieces or anything. He brings his king up, and now I have to find a way to do the tight squeeze on him. So I shift my rook over, protecting and attacking. He defends his pawn. So now I gotta squeeze him. I gotta find a way to make progress. These are on light squares, and I have a dark square bishop. Um, I don't have any pawns that are passed, so I have to find a way to win this, right? So I start with h4, kicking the king back, because I want to box him in as much as possible. He goes here. I bring my king up. I have to improve my king. It's the only piece that's not a perfect spot, really. He just moves his king around because he has to stay defending pawns. But now that he moved his king back, I take this opportunity to cut it off even further by planting my rook here. It also has these ideas. So he moves his king around, and I just slow improve. I don't see any reason to do anything crazy. And I'm going to bring my king up and maybe a king in here and see what happens. He just shifts his rook over, nothing specific. I improve my king because that's my plan, to get it somewhere like here. Now he moves his king over and I see that he's going here. It doesn't do anything because I can just shift my rook over, but I'm a mean person, so I did this, saying you can't even approach my rook. That upset him, and so he resigned. And I took his rating points, so I was grateful for that. It was a pretty good game. I didn't feel worse at any point, really. Um, yeah, I don't really know. It's a weird position. You can't go rook b8 because of this. So you can't go rook b8 and push the pawns. I guess rook c8 makes the most sense. Queen b6 is interesting. Okay, I like how all this went. Yeah, it was a super smooth game. I didn't really have any trouble. That was good. Okay, good game. Thank you, Mikhail. We keep going on the road to 2000.